Did Luka Dončić make you, a Nuggets fan, question your loyalties last night? Is a top NFL wide receiver suddenly back on the market? And what will the Broncos running back room look like in 2025? All things to come on today's rundown, and we begin in the basketball world as the Los Angeles Lakers and Luka Dončić in his first game against his former team, the Dallas Mavericks, gets his revenge. The Lakers topped the Mavericks 107-99, the Mavericks being significantly shorthanded without Derek Lively, Anthony Davis, etc. And it looked like at the front half of that game that LA was going to run away with this handedly. And you could tell from even before the opening tip-off that Luka took this seriously and very, very Michael Jordan-esque personally. Before the game, he was seen doing push-ups and workout drills, seemingly a shot at Nico Harrison in the front office for insinuating that he's out of shape. He hit a couple of big threes and big shots early in the first and second quarters and immediately looked over to the Mavericks bench and to Nico Harrison, who was sitting behind. You can see the photo there on the screen. Man, that is just, sometimes photographers just capture a moment that I think lives forever. And this will be one that I think lives for a very long time. The way you see Luka Dončić just kind of silhouetted, and you can tell by the hunching in his shoulders that he's looking directly at Nico Harrison, basically as a, hey, this one's for you, buddy. And on one hand, I want to maybe give a little credit to Nico Harrison for putting himself in that position, but he has been okay with showing up and sitting behind the Mavericks bench during road games. It's during home games when he has to face the likes of the fan base that feels he betrayed Luka and the team. That's when he's tended to maybe be a little less visible. But nonetheless, he was there, and he got to see every single point, rebound, and assist of Luka Dončić's impressive night. He finished with a triple-double, 19, 15, and 12, had 3 steals and a couple of blocks in there as well. He was very animated, very involved, did not look out of shape, but really looked to be building on that connective tissue that I think we saw manifest itself when the Lakers took care of the Nuggets just a couple of nights ago. So it felt like that performance from Luka and from the Lakers as a whole, as tired as they may have looked in the second half, showed that they are starting to come into form and could be, come playoff time, a little bit tougher of an out in the Western Conference than maybe they were a month ago. So for Luka Dončić, I think he gets his revenge. I think that we are still going to be waiting on the true moment where Luka returns to Dallas. He got to play Dallas on his home court this time, but coming up in a little bit later this season, we are going to see Luka go back to Dallas wearing the purple and gold for the first time, and that will be something I'm very excited for. In the world of the NFL, as we've mentioned all week, the scouting combine is upon us, and with that becomes speculation and reports and interview sound bites and things of that nature. Before we even get these guys, in their spandex running around and jumping and catching balls, we get a lot of things that come out of this. But the tweet that I think was catching a lot of people's attention, including the likes of Ian Rappaport and other insiders around the NFL, came from someone who has nothing to do with the scouting combine, but will be a very pivotal figure in this offseason. And that is T. Higgins, who tweeted very simply a blue baseball cap emoji with no context. And you can see there it had over 2 million views in just a handful of hours after being posted. And the blue cap emoji, for those who may not be aware, is kind of, it's indicative of the word to say cap, which is to insinuate that something is not true. Something that someone is saying or doing is false. And so we see this kind of cryptic tweet season come out all the time. We've been, because of the dysfunction we've experienced in Broncos country over the last close to a decade, we've seen a lot of it from Cortland Sutton to Jerry Jeudy, who seemed to be the master of it. And a lot of times it's a single word or it's an emoji, or something like that. Kevin Durant is one of the most repeat offenders in the NBA at this, but it feels very fitting and feels very in line with something that would come from an NFL wide receiver, something of a diva position. If you were to probably assign that to any position group around the league, wide receiver would be up there. And T. Higgins has been pretty vocal about what he thinks that he wants, what he thinks he deserves on the open market, and the fact that he is not willing to take necessarily a financial backseat or second fiddle to the likes of a Jamar Chase, and which makes it tough on Cincinnati to have to try to pay Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and keep the rest of their team and the stars they have on defense in the fold as they try to kind of make it out of the AFC during the Patrick Mahomes era that all these quarterbacks are trying to scrabble behind. So T. Higgins posting that cap emoji is interesting because on one hand, does it mean there are reports that because we've seen reports that the Bengals are trying to figure out a way to bring everybody back and that they're going to work to pay their guys, and their quarterback Joe Burrow's been very vocal about wanting the Bengals ownership group and their front office to do that. So is T. Higgins calling cap on that? Is he saying that there's much more that meets the eye as it relates to the intentions or the sincerity behind the Cincinnati Bengals front office efforts? Is he saying, that there's lack of truth or misdirection behind the idea that he wants to go somewhere or that he would even want to stay? I don't know. But what I do know is when you get a vague, out of nowhere, no context tweet or post or social media statement or whatever like that, a lot of heads, including mine, tend to turn. So could we see a situation where T. Higgins comes back onto the market after it was assumed that the Bengals are going to franchise tag him and he's going to work out a long-term deal or have the potential to work out a long-term deal in Cincinnati? I don't know. But even if he were to come back on the market, there's frankly just a part of me that doesn't feel the same way as maybe I did about it a month and a half ago, because as exciting of a prospect as T. Higgins is, and there are many around the league who think that he is not a bona fide number one wide receiver, that he's a very good two who's kind of masquerading or trying to flex the fact that he should be and is a one, even if he hasn't had to go against the tougher competition. I don't know that I necessarily buy into that, because I just think when you watch T. Higgins, I don't think that there is something that immediately jumps out on the screen that says, oh yeah, this guy's just a merchant of number two and number three corners, and he's kind of murking these defenses into a big payday. And we've seen it happen before. We saw Christian Kirk, not but a handful of years ago, was a $80 million receiver, and he hasn't done really anything, with the money that he was paid for that. But he was kind of paid on that number one level as the key piece or the crown piece of the wide receiver market in free agency. I like T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins is a talented player and a talented receiver, but I do think that there's maybe more that you can do with that money to be spent, whether it's re-signing Cortland Sutton to a certain level of an extension, a guy who you don't have to speculate, has chemistry and a rapport with Bo Nix. Was clearly his favorite target, as Court was to Russell Wilson before Bo. And while Cortland Sutton's on the north side of 30 and getting older, and you don't want to sink too much money into that either, I think that I'm more intrigued by the possibility of maybe extending Sutton and bringing in a different wide receiver, like say maybe a Chris Godwin, who maybe he prices out, maybe he doesn't, or even a secondary wide receiver in free agency that's on the lower side, just a veteran presence that maybe means we don't have to see little Jordan Humphrey on the field so much, Sean Payton's favorite whoopee. So even if T. Higgins is kind of there is some drama brewing in Cincinnati, and maybe he refuses to play on the franchise tag and tries to force his way out, and what have you. I don't see him as a legitimate trade option or free agency option for the Broncos anymore. I just think that there's better ways that you can address that need in that position in free agency and then in the draft in tandem than spending, upwards of 20, 22, whatever, $25 million a year on a T. Higgins, in a long-term contract situation. Another player whose contract situation has come into much focus this offseason is Javonte Williams. And that is on the heels of the Broncos having a pretty abysmal running room effort between Javonte, Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime, Tyler Bidet for very small spurts of the season. But it really didn't matter who you gave the ball to. It just wasn't working here in Denver as it relates to Sean's scheme and them trying to provide balance to their offense to complement Bo's passing ability. Bo Nix had enough games as a leading rusher of this team that led you to believe that they weren't going to win 7 or 8 games, let alone the 10 that they ended up winning in the playoff berth they ended up eclipsing. Now, I would say it's pretty well thought of that Javonte has played his last snap as a starter or really just as a Denver Bronco, and that the team will be moving in a different direction. It's unfortunate because coming out of North Carolina, I think Javonte had a lot of promise and he showed a lot of potential and flash. But really after recovering from that injury, he just never looked the same. And, that's just an unfortunate reality of the NFL, but especially at the running back position, which seems to be the most meat grinder, churn and burn position that we have, especially on the offensive side of the ball, in terms of use them and lose them, and you don't feel bad about it. So I think that may be Javonte's reality as a Denver Bronco. Could he get a shot somewhere else and be productive? Yeah. Could he get a shot somewhere else? And in hindsight, it looks like the Broncos got out at the right time. More than likely, at least that's how I would speculate it. But George Paton, he certainly didn't slam the door shut at the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis when asked about it. He said, there's a chance, I think, that we bring Javonte back. And I think Javonte is one of the best pass protectors in the league. He's still young and he's still ascending, another year removed from the injury, that obviously being the knee injury that Javonte suffered. Now, in fairness, George Paton did go on to say that there's a lot of running. It's a deep running back class. There's a lot of available guys out there, and it could be, quote, a good year to go out and get a guy. So in typical general manager and especially George Paton fashion, he kind of played both sides of the coin there and talked out of both sides of his mouth. I think the front half of that quote makes you think, oh, well, hey, they definitely didn't shut it down. But my guess would be that these guys, because they've already confirmed to be meeting with Ashton Jeanty and several other running backs at the combine, that there's clearly interest, whether they're going to keep Javonte or not. They are clearly interested in investing in that position during the NFL draft this April. And my guess is, more likely than not, just like tight end, the investment of that position is a higher priority on the front half of the draft in the first 3 rounds than it would be on the last 4 rounds. So I think that does spell kind of the end probably for a Javonte Williams. I don't think they'll be running it back with number 33, at least in the Javonte Williams iteration of it. Now, as for Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime was just brought in a year ago, so, he's probably factoring into the plans in some fashion. Jaleel McLaughlin, I think, showed spurts and times where he was the most effective runner or the most effective guy in space. Javonte, and George Paton alluded to it there, being one of the best pass protectors in the league. That really comes like a thanks for the gumball Mickey moment for me. But it's like, and I heard our guy Philip Lindsay say this yesterday, like, if that's when a coach is just raving about you as a running back, and you're not even that old, when he's raving about you as a running back about your pass protecting ability and nothing else, it kind of becomes the equivalent of like when you see a player get labeled as former first round draft pick. You know what I mean? Like we saw that with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, ironically, another running back. The report was former first round draft pick Clyde Edwards-Helaire works out with the New Orleans Saints. It's like, okay, when they start referring to you as former first round pick, you might just be cooked. It might just be that you have passed your prime, you have jumped the shark, and they are using that to prop up your value instead of, bottom tier underachieving running back Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I kind of think that's where it goes for me when George Paton is doing nothing but highlighting Javonte's pass blocking ability, which he is good at. He definitely was the best pass blocking running back on the team. But I think we need running backs who can run as a back and not just pass block. And I think that we can, find other ways to supplement that kind of protection. So in my opinion, I don't see us running it back with Javonte Williams. I don't think that's a bad thing. But I do think it does factor into the strategy behind how they approach the draft. And I think their conversations with Ashton Jeanty and other running backs will be interesting. I'll be keeping my eyes peeled and ears open as to what may come out of that. I think we need to start familiarizing ourselves with a lot of those names, especially on the front half of the draft, whether it's Devin Neal or Travion Henderson or obviously Ashton Jeanty. And how does the first round play out, which I think has the domino effect of how the rest of the positional hierarchy would play out. For example, if Colston Loveland is the guy they go with in the first round, I would think that would move running back up pretty high to the priority between rounds 2 and 3. And maybe they mix in a defensive tackle or an inside linebacker or things of that nature as well. But if Ashton Jeanty falls all the way to 20, as we spoke with James Palmer about yesterday, and the potential there kind of hinging around what the Dallas Cowboys do at number 12, and they're not going to trade up for him, so he has to fall all the way there, or at least we don't think that they will trade up for him, or it would be wise to trade up for him. So if that happens, then all of a sudden, what does that mean for other positions? I still think even if they draft Ashton Jeanty, you could see them pick up another running back in the 5th or 6th round, or come away with 2 out of the draft, 2 running backs, maybe even 2 tight ends, things of that nature, because of how desperate the need was at both of those positions, as we saw all of last season. And again, it's one of those stat lines or those tidbits that you read that you have to kind of squint and double check, did I read that correctly, when you learn that Colston Loveland at the University of Michigan, an offense that did not like to pass the football, that was very strictly, very significantly a run-first team, and yet Colston Loveland, in a run-heavy offense at the University of Michigan, outproduced the entire Denver Broncos tight end room in half the games. He had 10 games to play in college where he outproduced, from a yardage standpoint, the entirety of the Broncos tight end room combined in 17 games. So all that to say, I do think that we are going to see a complete overturn or changing of the guard at the starting running back position. And I think that who is the face of the new franchise depends on how they attack the first round. Is it Ashton Genty, or is it a mixture of like a Travion Henderson, a Devin Neal, or the like, at which point it maybe starts as a running back by committee? All fascinating things that I can't wait to see how they unfold and answer. And until then, we will be here to document it all. Look forward to the return of Valeri Nichushkin tonight. It was confirmed a little bit earlier this morning that he will return for the Colorado Avalanche tonight as they take on the New Jersey Devils. And a team that, if there was ever a team that really needed a lift and a boost right now, I'd say it's the Colorado Avalanche. Have the best case of the 4 major teams that we have in Denver. So we will see how that pans out, and we will break it down at the same time, same place tomorrow. I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put